welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Lovely to have you back. This week we are chatting to Stephen Veerapen, who writes historical fiction and academic history too. We talk about how one affects the other and really what's more creative. Now, his Anthony Blanke series is being released in audiobook form right now. You can hear about our fascination with the Tudors. We're still all over it, 500 years later. Does that make his job easier, though?
I suppose from a publicity angle or from a kind of salesman's angle, publicity departments and publishing and things, I think it's sellable if it's a kind of established, almost subgenre. I mean, Tudor historical fiction has become kind of a subgenre. But yes, you're quite right. It does mean what you're going to say that's new, or what you're going to look at that's from a different perspective, from a different angle. So, I think for every advantage comes a disadvantage, I guess.
Also, Stephen's busy, always finding time to write, but it turns out he doesn't love every part of that job.
So this is one thing that actually kind of annoys me, that's bad about writing, is once you're into something, you can't stop thinking about it in an annoying way. So I sleep very badly when I'm in the middle of a writing project because I'm kind of still writing in my head at 4 a.m. I'm still thinking, and I'll roll over and take notes. When I'm at the gym running, I'll have to stop every now and then because I'm kind of thinking, that line would be good, I could change that. So once I've got these notes, if I need to kind of trick myself into doing a proper writing block, I'll tell myself, okay, I'm just going to put the laptop on and I'm just going to transcribe those notes over. It'll take 5 minutes and that's all I'll do. But once I start, I'm not going to stop. I'll keep writing again. I'll start fresh stuff. So
it's all on the way with Stephen Veerapen in a brand new Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name is Dan Simpson. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look through an author's working day. We see what they do, where and how they do it. How do they give themselves the best chance of planning their day, and in Stephen's case, their year, to get words down and to hopefully get a bestseller out there. We are, cracking through November, just a week left to go. If you are fully submerged in NaNoWriMo, trying to get out is it 50,000 words in a month? People do their own thing, don't they? If that's you, if you are smashing through the words, do make the most of the NaNoWriMo tips that I'm bringing you, one every single day over on our TikTok and Instagram page. If you search Writer's Routine Podcast, you'll find both of them there. Just popping up to give you a little bit of inspiration, maybe something new that you can think about, tips that I've learned from the very best authors around while doing this show. Hopefully, I can't promise, hopefully it'll just help you get that day's words down, and then you can come back for another tip to do it all again tomorrow too. Now, this week on the show, we are chatting to Stephen Veerapen. He's best known for his Anthony Blanke series, really. Set in the Tudor period, it's all about the son of a black trumpeter, John Blanke, who was a real figure in the court of King Henry VIII. There are 2 books of this series out right now, of Blood Descended and of Judgement Fallen, and you can actually get copies on our bookshop.org store. The link is in the episode notes wherever you're listening, and they're being released as audiobooks too, if that's how you prefer to read. Not just those, Stephen is busy. He's written 3 in the Simon Danforth series. There are even novels out about the playwright Christopher Marlowe, which sees him act as a spy as well. There's all sorts from Stephen. He works in academia, and we talk about that influences the way that he writes, the way that he finds time to write, how he manages to fit it all in, and why, because it's truncated, his novel writing, he's only got a few weeks of the year to get it done. It means he's quite a thorough planner. You can hear how that all works out for him. Also, we chat about his rather sparse writing environment, and rather weirdly, I think it's fair to say, why he reads mortuary records for inspiration. So we run through all that, and also a really interesting point, he's pretty busy as it is, yet he's decided to write a biography of Henry VIII. I put it to Stephen, there are quite a few biographies of King Henry VIII out there. Why does he feel the need to write another one? What is he going to add? He tells us all. It's on the way in a brand new writer's routine with Stephen Veerapen, and we start as we always do with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
Where I sit down to write, generally I can see a television, I can see a portrait of Elizabeth I, and I can see a portrait of Henry VIII.
So that's very on brand, I have to say. So that seems fairly... threadbare's the wrong word, but it's fairly basic. What else have you got around you that might help you tap into the creativity of what you're doing? So, I mean, post-it notes or planning points or notebooks, anything like that?
Well, no, see, that all seems extremely organised, Dan. That would be a good thing. What I find, though, is I am someone who's easily distracted. If there is something that I can pay attention to instead of the screen, I will pay attention to it. So threadbare actually works very well for me. I want as little distraction as possible.
So the selection of Elizabeth I and Henry VIII, were they kind of always there, and you grew to write about them, or like talk to me about the decision to have those there?
Well, I've always been interested in the Tudor period and the Stuart period. Actually, why they came about was really as a product of lockdown. I know we all try and forget about lockdown. One of the things that I suppose have repressed about lockdown was, do you remember that period at the start when everything just shut down and workplaces had shut down? No one was sure when things would pick up again. One of the things that I found to fill my time was buying rubbish that I don't need online, browsing things online that I thought, oh, I'll have that. And I discovered metal posters that one could customise and buy, and they had designs of Elizabeth I, they had designs of Henry VIII. So I ended up just buying these things out of boredom during lockdown, and it turned out to be a good choice. I find them quite inspiring now.
That's interesting. That might have just been a throwaway comment, but if you do find them quite inspiring, like you've been writing this kind of stuff for a little while, so before lockdown, how have having these two giants of history looking down on you, how has that influenced what you've done since?
Well, this might sound maybe a bit kind of pretentious, but I think sometimes when writing history, it's easy to forget that these were real people, that these were actual figures. They weren't just icons or anything like that. Having the portraits and things visible, you can sometimes just glimpse them. I mean, on a basic level, you think, God, look, the fashions and things that they wore will keep you on track. But on the other hand, you think, yes, there's the kind of iconic nature of them, but you can see the hands that are extremely detailed and human. You can see the eyes that are extremely detailed and human. You suddenly remember these are real people. They had real lives.
So the space around you is quite, well, threadbare, and it's not there to grab your attention. What about the desk that you're writing on? Talk to me about that.
Well, I'm going to have to bore you by saying it's a completely plain desk. I actually do have another couple of little impulse buys, little Tudor figurines that I have, almost kind of little grotesque things, a little Henry VIII, a little Elizabeth, and a little Mary Queen of Scots.
Oh, that's very cute. On the screen, we get quite niche and nerdy and quite technical. We're very interested in what you're writing on. So what software are you writing on? And Stephen, most importantly, what font do you write with?
Times New Roman. Anything else is kind of blasphemy, and it throws me off, honestly, if I see. So when students submit essays, if they're on anything other than Times New Roman, I have to pull myself away from being biased in the marking. Like, no Comic Sans, please. With software, Microsoft Word is what I use. I know there are all kinds of weird and wonderful things you can get now that I don't know what they do. They offer help with grammar and offer help with all manner of things. I'm really just, I suppose, a traditionalist in this one way, in this single way, in that Microsoft Word is what I understand. It frustrates me to no end, I should say. Stupid things about Microsoft Word, like it's when you take page breaks for headings, and sometimes they work and sometimes they just do whatever they like. So it annoys me, but I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. So it's what I know.
Yeah, a traditionalist is It's interesting you say that because it does sound very much like that. As in, I speak to some authors who enjoy the pomp, the ceremony, I guess the circus around writing, making sure everything's fit and proper, to kind of absorb yourself in the luxury of being this grand writer. Whereas you like it to be as sparse as possible so you can take it back to its bare bones, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, it was really the Romantics, wasn't it, who pioneered the idea of the image or the myth of the writer in their garret tower, leading this kind of secluded life, waiting for inspiration to hit and everything. I think it's like anything else. I think possibly it's my background in academia, I suppose, doing a PhD, having done a master's, honours, all of that sort of stuff. You just learn that writing is something that you can and kind of have to do when deadlines are approaching, for example. It's not something that you always have the luxury of thinking, I want to be inspired, I want to go through the ritual and things.
Do you afford yourself anything grander when you're writing fiction? I know that you write a lot of historical non-fiction and academic history. As you say, that feels more of a job, doesn't it? You know, you're allowed to be a bit dull and sparse in what you're doing because it feels like that's right for something academic. But when you're writing fiction, when it's the more, I guess, imaginative side, is that reflected in how and when and where you work?
I would actually say it's the other way around. For me, anyway, when I'm writing fiction, I think I've still got a bit of, they call it now imposter syndrome, don't they? It feels like you're kind of a fraud. Well, to me it does, when I'm writing fiction, because you're making things up. You're inventing things. So you kind of feel in the back of your head, people will be onto me. They'll know that I'm making things up. Whereas when I'm writing non-fiction, if I'm writing, my next non-fiction will be about witches and King James and all of that sort of stuff. When you're writing that, you do kind of feel slightly grander, I think. You feel, I'm contributing, I'm doing something. This is not just invention that I'm doing for the fun of it. This is, it's still fun. I still find it fun, but you feel like you're doing something that's maybe almost more respectable, which I know is wrong. It's absolutely not the case, but it feels like it.
We'll talk about the writing routine in just a sec. I want to pick your brains about the Tudor period, and you said that you've always been fascinated by it. One of the most famous musicals in the world right now is Six, which is about the six ex-wives of Henry VIII, and the BBC are about to bring back another adaptation of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. And it is, of all the things that we learn at school, I think most people will remember in the UK, Henry VIII had 6 wives, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, right? So why are we so fascinated, do you think? Why have you set so many different stories in this period looking at different figures from that era?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think certain periods of history, certain events in history just hit, they just kind of strike a chord. And I've thought about this quite a lot, actually. I've thought, why the Tudors? Why World War II? Why the Titanic? Why Jack the Ripper? Why are certain things just memorable, and why have they landed so strongly? And actually, my argument would be it goes back to those images that I've got on the wall. It's the kind of iconic imagery. It starts with that. I think if any period or event or whatever has really powerful imagery, like the Holbein portrait of Henry VIII, or the Armada portrait of Elizabeth I, or I can even think of sinking of the Titanic, so stern pointing into the air. It's extremely just a dramatic image. You start with that, and then that's not enough, obviously. It's got to have more than that. It's got to have, I suppose, interesting taglines. You mentioned the 6 wives. I mean, that's just, again, like a really memorable tagline. People want to know more. And then beyond that, you've got all the debates and things, but you only get to those if you've been hooked in by the image, if you've kind of learned to recognise that image. I think that's why Hollywood keeps returning to the same stories. I mean, it's not just lack of imagination. I think Hollywood is all about the visual arts. It's about recognising powerful imagery, it recognises that the image of Henry VIII is a really kind of memorable, iconic one. So it keeps telling that story. It recognises that the Titanic's sinking, black stern against the starlit sky, is an iconic image. It keeps telling that story.
Does it make your job easier or harder? Because you've got a natural in if you're setting something in the Tudor period, as you say, it's littered with these iconic images. So we are going to be drawn to that anyway. But then you need to find a new angle. You need to find new characters and make it accessible there.
Yes. So does it make things, I suppose, from a publicity angle or from a kind of salesman's angle, publicity departments and publishing and things, I think it's sellable if it's a kind of established, almost subgenre. I mean, Tudor historical fiction has become kind of a subgenre. But yes, you're quite right. It does mean what you're going to say that's new, or what you're going to look at that's from a different perspective, from a different angle. So, I think for every advantage comes a disadvantage, I guess. It's an interesting question. So if I am into a novel writing period, I don't want to be doing anything else. I mean, in terms of work. So that's why generally I will try and write things over the summer when the university is on its summer break. I'll try and book that in because I like a clear run at something. I also think if it's a particular day, so let's say I've got my day off, or my week off, even better, or month off if I'm lucky. I mean, each one is slightly different. So some I'll get up and if I'm really into it, I'll start writing. I'll have coffee first in the morning. I'll have coffee to get me going, and I'll write for a couple of hours. And then I usually take an hour off and go to the gym and run for an hour or so. And then I'll come back and write again. And then I might take a break. I just kind of get tired. And then I might write again in the evening. So it would be in 3 kind of blocks. And the afternoon block would probably be the biggest one there, I think. Sometimes, though, I'll mix that up. So sometimes if the mood strikes me, I'll get up early and go to the gym early, and then I can spend the rest of the day writing. That kind of frees me up to write non-stop. But for me, it's there's a kind of debate about whether writing a novel is a marathon or a sprint. For me, I think it's always a sprint. I like that. I always worry that if I spent years and years and years on one thing, I would get really bored of it, and I don't think it would get better. I think it would get worse because I'm bored of it. Whereas if I take this full summer and I'm going to write this thing, the first draft at least, I'm going to write this thing, I want to be writing every day until it's done.
And how long would that take?
It varies. So I can get a first draft of about 100,000 words in, say, 6 weeks, 5 weeks to 6 weeks, I think. If it's shorter, I can do it quicker. If I'm really, really into it. I find actually writing fiction is quicker for me than writing non-fiction. But what I should preface that with is I'm a big planner. So before I actually start prologue or chapter 1 or whatever, I have planned it down to what's going to be in every chapter, how many scenes are going to be in each chapter, where the climaxes are going to be, all that kind of thing.
We'll get to that process in just a sec, because I always love finding out how you block that out and how you make the decision of what to do that. But you mentioned earlier that you get distracted quite easily, and you like to think of writing as a job where you can just sit down and you want to revel in the simplicity that you can just sit down and do it. In practice, how good are you at doing that? When you've got these 3 writing blocks a day, so first thing in the morning, when you come back from the gym, then a bit at night, how able are you to just sit down and, right, I'm going now, I'm working, I've switched my brain on?
I think sometimes it takes just a bit of force. So you're avoiding procrastination. If you can avoid procrastination, then I'm good at it. I'm good at it once I start to do it. And there are kind of little psychological tricks that I play on myself. So I'll, for example, have made notes. So this is one thing that actually kind of annoys me, that it's bad about writing, is once you're into something, you can't stop thinking about it in a annoying way. So I sleep very badly when I'm in the middle of a writing project because I'm kind of still writing in my head at 4 a.m. I'm still thinking, and I'll roll over and take notes. When I'm at the gym running, I'll have to stop every now and then because I'm kind of thinking that line would be good. I could change that. So once I've got these notes, if I need to kind of trick myself into doing a proper writing block, I'll tell myself, okay, I'm just going to put the laptop on and I'm just going to transcribe those notes over. It'll take 5 minutes and that's all I'll do. But once I start, I'm not going to stop. I'll keep writing again. I'll start fresh stuff. So
if you're able to write 100,000 words, ideally in about 6 weeks, and you do plan thoroughly, how prescribed is it how many words you're writing each day?
That is not so much prescribed. I mean, so the way that comes down to planning, I think. If I know roughly, okay, this project is going to be 95,000 words, for example. Let's say I've signed a contract for that. You can break that up in your head to, okay, how many chapters roughly is that going to be? How many words is going to be in each chapter roughly again? So that makes it quite prescribed. But obviously, I mean, once you start, things change. So this chapter might not belong there anymore. This climax doesn't fit. Or the character I'd imagined as a kind of, I don't know, a bully character. This character is just a horrible bully. So in chapter 17, he's going to be horrible and hectoring. But once you get to chapter 17 in the writing, or even get to chapter 15, something, well, that's going differently. He's kind of a bit more fleshed out. He now wouldn't play that role. So you have to kind of think on the fly. Okay, I've prescribed everything to the nth degree, but there's got to be flexibility within that to change course if needed, or correct course.
How do you find your energy going during those points? So it's you said that you think writing is a sprint, not a marathon. So by that nature, you're going all out. You're getting these words done in 6 weeks while you finally have this time. How are you able to keep up with your brain's want to tell a story?
I think it becomes almost more kind of fervent when you reach about the halfway point. When you reach the halfway point and you start thinking, this is working. So there's always, I think, a kind of point in your writing, in anyone's writing, I would imagine, when you have to almost to say, is this working or is this not working? And once you hit the point where you think this is working, that re-energizes me, actually. It gets me going again. I think, my God, this is actually, I'm into it now. It's like, when you're reading a book and you get really into it and you're one more page, or one more chapter, I'll just get to the end of this chapter. I have almost exactly the same feeling if I'm in a writing project and I'm really enjoying it and I've got really into it. I'm thinking, right, one more chapter. Sometimes I once wrote 12,000 words in a day just because I wanted to kind of find out what happens and keep going.
It sounds so busy, and I know that you're doing so many other different things. When you are writing a novel, how much time are you setting aside for, I guess, flights of research fancy? I know that you've plotted quite thoroughly and you know your subject, but how are you knowing at what point you're going to be like, oh, I need to research a bit of what life was like in Tudor court in this year?
Well, that's a good question, because often you don't know what you don't know until you reach the point where you have to write it. So you almost think in the back of your head, okay, that scene will be, for example, set at the Tudor court in a particular year. But then when you get close to it, you think, oh wait, I've written this in and it's, I don't know, now approaching Easter or something. What was the actual ceremony? What was the daily life like? What kind of masses and routines and things were said and held at a Tudor Easter at that particular time? So you do end up having to kind of go down unexpected corridors of research. And that can easily eat up a few days. So you can eat up a few days. So trying to find the right resources to get this right. At some point, though, I think, and I've met this before, you can get lost in the research, the unexpected research, because it's interesting and it's fun. But you're thinking, okay, am I just doing this to avoid writing now? I could just tell the story. I could just continue telling the story. And it is the first draft, so if need be, I can come back to it and fix any historical errors or inaccuracies or anything.
Now, you mentioned that when you're running at the gym or when you're doing things, perhaps sometimes you have to kind of stop and think about what you're doing because you're so absorbed in your story. You've got these 3 blocks of writing a day. At the end of the day, how good are you at switching off and tapping into whatever it is you're doing?
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. I can't. I find it really, really difficult to switch off. And I, as I say, it affects sleep because, you lie down and you try and go to sleep and you try and not think about things, try and think about nothing. And it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work for me because my mind wanders back and I start to overthink things and question things and that line's not working, or oh, he could do this or she could do that or she could say this. And then I suddenly think, what if that's gone in the morning? I need to write it down right now. So I'm very bad at switching off.
This is quite a grand question, but and it's actually one of the most basic questions that a writer ever gets asked, right? But you kind of work across so many different things in your work as an academic and different stories with different characters. You're deciding who and what to write. I know that there's more formal things that decide this because you're often locked into a contract where you have to write this book, but what's picking your interest as to what the next big project you're working on is? At what point is that decided before you'll ramp up the planning and then getting to it?
So part of it, obviously, as you say, Dan, is what's going to be contracted, what am I going to actually write? But that is only part of it. Sometimes it's a judgment call as well. Sometimes you have to and you have conversations with people, you speak to your agent and things, is this a good idea? Does this idea have legs? Should I make a start on it? So you're not completely judging this yourself, but there is an element of judgment where you think, okay, is this one something that I want to hang about and wait and maybe see if it can get contracted? Or is this something that I know this is a good idea, I'm going to start doing it right now? So the thing after Witches is out next, what year is this? 2024. It's out in 2025. But I've just signed the contract for, this will surprise you not at all, a book about Henry VIII, a non-fiction about Henry VIII. And with the new angle there, it's going to be Henry VIII and his relationship really with the British Isles. He's always written as the King of England. He was the King of England, but he had much grander plans for Scotland and so on. So,
Stephen, I'm going to ask you a question here based on that. So, and like, I mean, no slight at all by this. As I said, you are busy. There are a few biographies of Henry VIII out there. At what point have you thought, oh, maybe this is the thing? Maybe I could do it from this angle. Maybe I could dedicate the rare and precious time that I have to doing this. Oh, I imagine it'll be quite a beefy look at one of the most famous figures of history. So when did you think of that? And then what was the process of getting that contract signed?
Well, that's actually a kind of interesting one in that I was thinking of what wouldn't sell, because I was really interested in James IV of Scotland and James V. But how many people have heard of James IV and V? Can I tell their stories in relation to Henry? What I found in a lot of biographies of Henry VIII, and as you say, there are loads, and I've read loads and loads of them. And often Scotland would be treated, I found, as an independent country, because it was an independent country at the time. But when I was reading about what Henry was up to and what he was writing and what he was saying about Scotland, he didn't think it was an independent country or should be. So I thought, why has no one kind of acknowledged what Henry thought he was and who he was? He thought he was, and later in his reign declared himself almost the Emperor of the British Isles. I thought, my God, that's what he was up to. He was trying to be like the Emperor Charles V. He kind of saw something, a title, thought, I'll have that, I want that. And it felt like, here's something about Henry VIII, a kind of attitude, a mindset that hasn't actually been written about.
How much are you doing then before you're approaching your agent or your publishers?
What I generally do is write out a kind of proposal. Usually, I mean, people like proposals short. No one wants that kind of 10-page proposal. About a page to 2 pages. And what they like to see in the proposal is, okay, what is the output going to be? What is that? So that's a kind of academic-y thing as well. They like, what's the research output? What is this thing going to look like? What is new about it? And what they also like with historical non-fiction is what kind of documents are you going to be using? Things that maybe haven't been used in biographies before.
More from Stephen on the show in just a sec. If you're enjoying what we do, if you've learned any tips, bits of advice, if the NaNoWriMo tips on socials are really helping you out, well, you can always kind of say thanks to us for doing that. It really helps us carry on by supporting us. There are 2 ways that you can do that. If you'd like to become a monthly backer to get access to our Patreon community, where we've got tips, where we've got little behind the scenes stuff going on, there's videos popping up there, there is merch, there is bonus content, there is even a way for your book to sponsor this show. If you'd like to do that, you can become a monthly backer over on our Patreon page, patreon.com/writersroutine. Now, it doesn't cost a lot, just a few dollars a month. It helps you get access to that, and it helps me carry on bringing you these episodes as often as I can. Now, I know that you might not want to get involved in a monthly capacity like that, so you can make a one-off pledge, a tip, a donation over on our Ko-Fi. I still haven't figured out how to say it. Ko-Fi page. I think it's a strange pun on lo-fi and coffee. I'm not really sure if it works when you read it out. Anyway, if you get to ko-fi.com/writersroutine, there is a way that you can help us out there as well. Whatever you can send, it goes an extraordinarily long way. I appreciate any tip that I get, I promise you that, and it just helps me carve out the time to do this for you. So there's Patreon, there's Ko-Fi. You can find links to both of those on our website. Probably the easiest way for you to get there is writersroutine.com. Let's get back to it then with Stephen Veerapen chatting about his Anthony Blanke novels. You can hear in a sec why they were all inspired by his morbid curiosity, the need to write a unique death, and why the search for those takes him to mortuary records. Also, we talk about Tudor fiction, what it needs to have in it. If you're reading that, do you want to see Anne Boleyn? Do you want to see King Henry VIII? What is it? We talk all about that. And we get back to it chatting about, well, how he's busy, right? We've learned that already, teaching and researching and writing academia. So when it comes to writing a novel, how does he plan a year to make that happen?
So from beginning to end, from start to finish, in terms of a calendar year, I mean, calendar years is difficult. So what I tend to do is we start our semester, our kind of winter semester at the university in January, and that runs until kind of April. So during that period, I'm teaching, I'm doing admin-y things. But let's imagine then that I had an idea. What would the idea be? What shape would it be for a novel, first of all? For me, it's going to start with a character. I'm going to think, okay, who's an interesting character in this story? Or who might potentially be a kind of new or fresh voice? I'll start with that. Then what I'll try and do, so I'll try and get the planning done before we get to summer so that I can hit the ground running in summer. I'll try and lock it down to a particular year. I think, okay, I've got this character. Where might he, and I have to say, with me, it's always a he. I don't think I've ever had a central female protagonist. I might get a bit lost. Which year can he be active? Which year can the event be? I'll try and think about what genre I'm going for. So for me, it's always going to be historical fiction, yes, but within that, historical crime fiction. But I could break that down further as well. Is it going to be a murder mystery? If I know it's a murder mystery, that's going to give me a shape to the story. I know there's got to be a reveal at the end. Or is it going to be a kind of procedural where I can jump between the interesting, hopefully, protagonist's head and perhaps the villain's head? I can sort of have a cat and mouse thing going on. So I'll plan that in advance. Then I think probably as we approach summer, I would really start to firm this up. I'd think, okay, what's maybe the opening scene going to be? What's the climax going to be? What I find helpful is if at the start I've locked it down to a year, if I've said, okay, this is going to take place in 1522, around teaching and things, just as a kind of fun research thing, I can read research books about the 1520s. I mean, I can look up the state papers of the 1520s. I can kind of get a feel for the major events. And what I generally like to do, I think I've done this in everything. This is a well that I go to a lot. I think, okay, my year had this interesting thing going on in it. How can I have my story kind of dovetail around this major historical event? How can the climax of the major historical event perhaps dovetail with the climax of my story?
It's just, you mentioned knowing what genre it is and then what subset of genre it is. Like if it's a murder mystery, you know it's going to do this. If it's more procedural, how have you learned those different beat points and what you need in each genre? Is it through just kind of having done it a while? Is there some particular study that's gone into that too?
I think it's from reading and doing. I'm sorry if that sounds, I get pretentious, reading and doing. But I think if you've read a lot of texts in these subgenres, you get a feel for what you like and what you don't like. In doing it, you start to kind of get your own rhythm and things. You start to get your own feel for how to do it as well. And I have to say, that's the same with non-fiction. From reading a lot of non-fiction, you start to think, oh, I love the way they've done that. And you also maybe read things you don't like so much and think, oh, it's not as dramatic as it could be. It's not as kind of engaging as it could be. And then you start to find your own way of doing it.
Just before we move on to the Anthony Blanke novels and the audiobooks, which are out now, when we're thinking about like beats that you have to hit, and I was thinking of this because you were talking about writing the biography of Henry VIII, and there have been quite a few, but they've never really reflected on Scotland too much, and that makes me think about what they do have to have in them. So when you are writing about maybe Tudor fiction, is there anything that as an author I probably need to put a bit of this in? Like the fans of Tudor fiction will be annoyed if this element isn't there, if you know what I mean, or this aspect isn't touched upon.
Yeah, well, that is kind of two things there. So if it's a Tudor era murder mystery, for example, someone has to die within the first few chapters. That has to be done. Times have kind of changed since the golden age of detective murder mystery fiction, where Agatha Christie could have a book where she would spend chapter after chapter after chapter introducing everyone in a kind of leisurely way before anyone dies. Now people, I think, want their death a little bit sooner. But in terms of the historical stuff that people expect, I mean, yes, there are things. There are candles and tapestries, and there are kind of props that people expect to see. But I think there are also characters, and this is a funny thing I think about Tudor fiction. In Tudor fiction, there's that perception, and it's probably a mistaken perception, and so I apologise for kind of furthering it. But there's a perception that the royals and the big figures were much closer to the kind of lower strata of society than, say, in later periods. So in a Victorian era novel, people don't expect to see Queen Victoria necessarily. They don't expect to see Prince Albert having a cameo appearance. They might, but they don't. It's not necessary. Whereas with Tudor fiction, I think people come for a glimpse of Henry VIII, even if he doesn't actually have a speaking role or anything. A kind of cameo appearance by Cardinal Wolsey or Thomas Cromwell or something. So I think, I shamelessly cater to that. Completely shamelessly. Don't ask me why. The answer is just I'm a ghoul and I like true crime and horrible death and stuff. One of the fun things for me as a ghoul is that you get to kill characters in unusual and interesting ways. When you're writing any sort of murder mystery, part of the fun of it for me is how can I kill people in ways that maybe aren't expected or people haven't seen before or people aren't familiar with. So in the process of my ghoulish research, I was reading mortuary records, I believe it was. I came across mortuary records that weren't Tudor, They were from the Victorian period, but one of them was about a man who was, I try not to spoil how much of this I drew on. He was found having died with a poker, which was still red hot, which had been forced into his mouth and down his throat multiple times. I thought, my God, that's hideous. That's disgusting. I'm using that. I'm transplanting it to the Tudor period, but I'm using that. And it really stemmed from that. Once you've got that, you think, okay, someone is going to die by fire poker in the mouth. That's, I mean, verging on slasher movie territory here, but I'm okay with it. Also a fan of those. So if I start with that, I think, okay, well, how did he end up like that? How did he end up being found skewered? And all of a sudden, I've got something to build on.
So I guess let's draw even further back than that if we can, because you've written historical fiction set in this era, kind of investigating it from a lot of different angles. I mean, there are books about Christopher Marlowe, the playwright, as a spy, right? And then you've got the Simon Danforth series as well. So what was it about Anthony Blanke, who is descended from a real figure in history, right? What was it about that story that drew you in and thought, I know I've written quite a bit about the Tudor times, but this is another way I can investigate it?
Yeah, so that again comes from character. It comes from thinking about character. The character, Anthony Blanke, as you say, yes, mixed race son of John Blanke, who was one of the first black people ever recorded at the Tudor court in Tudor England. So I was interested in John Blanke. I read Miranda Kaufman's Black Tudors, which is fantastic. And I thought, this is a character who's now starting to be recognised in non-fiction, whose story, though it wasn't meant to fictionalise, but given my dad was from Mauritius, I thought, well, John Blanke marrying at the time was to beget children. Presumably he married a white woman, because we have no record of black women other than possibly one whom he didn't marry at the time. He might have had a mixed race son. That story I could write. So I thought, what would that be like? And one of the things I'd come across, again, wasn't specifically written about, so this was before Miranda Kaufman, is all the biographies of Henry VIII, right back to Pollard's 1904. You read them and you might get mention of these masques and festivals and things that went on at Henry's court, where they would have people, Henry himself at one point, dressing up as Turks and dressing up as Moors and things and parading around. And they used blackface. We know when we get to the Stuarts, it was makeup. In Henry's time, it might have been silk masks and things. But they were doing this. So I thought, what would it be like then to be that person that is kind of treated as a sideshow almost? I mean, you might have a good life if you are seen as something different and you are brought into courtly circles and sort of employed, given gainful employment. But it can have been the most pleasant experience in the world to be put on show, to be treated as a kind of curio.
You have this idea of investigating that. It can't have been that nice to have been kind of paraded around and prodded and poked in various forms, I guess. But so you've got that idea, yet you need a plot for it, and you make these mystery novels. So what's the leap there?
The leap, I suppose, there was to do with plotting. So I could have gone down a completely different road, I suppose, with Anthony Blanke. I mean, it could have been nothing to do with murder mystery. I could have just a kind of exploratory narrative, speculative fiction. What was it like to be this guy? And then just sort of invent I suppose, a life to death kind of plot or something like that. Short answer for that is I just like writing murder mysteries. I like writing murder. I like the kind of puzzle of it. And I suppose that's because I've always liked reading those books. So when it came to making that decision, okay, I've got this character, I've got an idea for a character. What do I want to do with him? Do I want it just to be a kind of exploration of his life or imagined life? Or do I want to throw in a bit of murder in there? It was an easy one, an easy decision. I thought, yeah, murder people.
You're investigating quite a lot as well, because it's not just the plot of murdering people. You want to look up what it would have been like to have been a black person during Tudor England and doing that through John Blanke, then you want to put in your natural own, penchant for historical knowledge. And also you're drawing on your own history, right? Because you are half Scottish and half Mauritian, yes? How are you balancing all that together? And when you've got a personal side to this, how much are you letting yourself be mined, I guess?
That's a difficult question, Dan. So one of the things when I'm teaching students, actually, as I'm doing in 20 minutes, one of the things I tell students is you're doing a lot when you're writing any sort of fiction. You are balancing a lot of things. You are trying to do a lot of things at the same time. Ultimately, you're trying to engage people. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to create characters. You're trying to write realistic dialogue. You're trying to, if it's historical, get things accurate, bring in historical colour. You're trying to explore themes. So yeah, you're trying to do a lot of things at the same time. I think in terms of how much of myself I bring to it, I think with everything you write, there's an element of yourself. And sometimes it actually becomes a kind of trick of trying not to do that. I was conscious of this character isn't me. Very much not me. I wasn't alive 500 years ago. I can try and imagine, but I can't sort of completely do it. And because students have also asked me this, all my characters react like I would react, they'll kind of think the way I would think, how do I stop that? And I think it's kind of drawing a clear personality for your character based on their experiences. Okay, this is the life he's had, this is the relationship with his father that he had, which wasn't at all my relationship with my father, so that's going to make him behave in certain ways, that's going to make him react to things in certain ways, that's going to kind of colour him in. So I don't know if that answers that. I just keep wondering a bit.
No, it does. And my last question, because I know you've got to get off and actually teach some things. Many historical fiction authors are very concerned with getting the historical fact right, particularly in battles and stuff like that, and where the sun was shining on precise days. I've had that before. But because you're writing 500 years ago, and you're writing murder mysteries as well, how concerned are you with making those little historical details spot on?
So yeah, I think this is a really big question in historical fiction, and it does vary from period to period. So if you're writing a more recent historical period, you might have weather reports and things about really detailed information. 500, 1,000 years ago, it doesn't survive. You might get the odd scrap. And if I find a scrap of information about a drought or a torrential rain or something in a particular event, I'll try and incorporate it. In terms of accuracy, there are a couple of things. In fact, there are more than a couple. There are a lot of things. A lot of things I try and get right. One of them actually follows on from my PhD study. So my PhD was nothing to do with creative writing. Years and years ago, my PhD was about the Elizabethan legal system and how it worked. So that kind of gave me a grounding in how much law there was about in the period. And obviously, if you're writing anything involving murder, you just have to think, who was in charge? How was this? In the days before police and things, how was this investigated? Who had jurisdiction? Who had power of arrest? So all of these things I will try and get right. Or I will try and, if I want to kind of get around how it might have happened, I'll try and introduce plausible reasons for why, I don't know, Henry VIII's Knight Marshal, who was in charge of ordering things at court, why was he not involved here? Oh, here's a reason. This is why he's kept out of it. So I'll try almost to justify. I'll try and get things right. And if I know I'm not going to get them right, I'll try and justify why they're wrong or why it's not following the kind of usual or expected channels.
And that is it from Stephen Veerapen in this week's episode of Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Stephen for coming on the show. Those Anthony Blanke novels, there are a few that you can get right now on our bookshop.org page. and the audiobooks are being released too, if that's how you'd prefer to take them in. Loads more novels from Stephen too. To get copies, use that bookshop.org page. It's uk.bookshop.org/shop/writers routine. There's a lot going on. The link is in the episode notes wherever you're listening. Now, with just a week left of NaNoWriMo, please do make the most of the daily tips that I'm bringing you on our Instagram and TikTok page. You can follow those, search Writers Routine Podcast, and it will bring you up. I'm not sure about Blue Sky yet. I understand we're all flocking to Blue Sky, but do I need another social place to dedicate my time to distract me? Is it just going to go the way of X in a few years' time? Will I be filled with hope that maybe this might be a new utopia and the rug will get dragged under my feet again? I'm not sure. Anyway, why was I talking? Oh, right, Blue Sky. Yeah, it's because we're on Instagram and TikTok. You can find those daily writing tips over there. Also, if you can, please do support the show on Patreon or Ko-Fi. Links are in the episode notes, and you can get in touch and find everything at writersroutine.com. And I will see you next week with a brand new guest on the show. Until then, see you soon.